If you thought it was okay for companies to promote Mother's Day or Father's Day online, well, guess again. Kris discovered that could be triggering.
Look what Levi sent customers ahead of Mother's Day. They acknowledged that Mother's Day could be triggering and gave customers the option to opt out of their promotions. Kay Jewelers did the same, adding Mother's Day can be a challenging time. Even DoorDash recognized the trigger and posted Mother's Day may be a difficult time for some.
That was a trigger warning.
Intense backlash surrounds the popular Netflix show 13 Reasons Why. The controversial series depicts teen suicide.
Well, please welcome Kris Gutierrez, senior news anchor for Merritt Street Media. Kris, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's a big problem because I think it's symptomatic of a mindset of coddling people and not preparing them for the next level of life. So what did you find out when you were digging into all this?
It's something that you've pointed out clearly. Part of getting through something is you don't tiptoe around an issue or a subject or a trauma, right? You get through that not by avoiding something. So when you avoid something, experts will tell you you're doing yourself a disservice because you never find yourself on the other side of that by ignoring what happened. Instead, you get that help through therapy and through counseling. It's like you go to the gym and you work out your body, right, Dr. Phil? At the same time, you want to work out your mind. You got to get things off of your mind so you can see the other side, you can get through it. You do that through counseling and through therapy, not by avoiding it or tiptoeing around it.
Well, of course. What stood out to you most during your investigation?
One thing I should point out is that when it comes to these trigger warnings, the experts will say that they're not specific enough in a general setting. The one that really stuck out to me is in London, Romeo and Juliet. Did you know at the Globe Theater, it comes with a trigger warning?
Yeah, and it's interesting what it says. I mean, let's take a look at this. Globe Theater, London. Upsetting Romeo and Juliet. Production contains suicide, violence, reference to drug use, gunshot sound effects, and stage blood. Provides helpline after show.
Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, so what it says here is production contains suicide and violence. Well, spoiler alert. In case you didn't know, somebody commits suicide in here, and this is about two people.
Right.
One of them's going to kill themselves.
You know, the more I think about it, as a dad, you talked about coddling, right? I let my kids fail, and it's hard, right? But what I'm doing, I hope, is I'm building resiliency within them, that they know they can pick themselves back up, and whatever that issue is that they're dealing with doesn't define them. That's not who they are.
If you hover over your children, if you keep people from experiencing stress, strain, a degree of anxiety, they're never going to learn. And it's not just that trigger warnings don't work, which they don't. It's that trigger warnings have been shown to create the very anxiety, the very panic, the very things that they're trying to protect the person from.
Right.
And depending on what resources you look at, 50 to 75% of universities use these, and they have access to the same research that I have access to, which means they know they don't work. So why are they using them anyway? Because they're virtue signaling. And to me, that seems incredibly hypocritical to do something they know does not work, knows does not teach coping skills, knows does not prepare and toughen up the person for the next level of life.
Resiliency is what I'm trying to build in my kids.
Yeah,
personally.
well, you don't do that by not letting them ever scrape a knee, not ever letting them experience something that gives them some degree of upset. Thanks for doing that piece.
Got it.
We needed that.
Hi, Dr. Phil. This is Claire Ting, and today we're on the campus of Cornell University. It's clear that the debate about trigger warnings is far from over, so today we're going to get some thoughts from the students on campus.
The trigger warnings that people really care about: racial violence, slavery, pedophilia,
mobbings and lynchings, domestic violence, sexual assault, relationship abuse, yelling. If someone's experienced that as a child, words of warning are helpful.
Teachers are able to still teach what they want to teach, just with a caveat of saying that this could be sensitive to others.
If you've gone through sexual assault, obviously you should get a heads up. because those mental emotions and feelings can absolutely manifest into physical symptoms and even hospitalization, which is something I don't think the older generation understands. We as Gen Z, we've prioritized mental health so much more.
We've been subject to trauma. The trigger warnings, this is more an act of love, a small thing we can do that eases pain for people in a very, very hurtful world.
Thank you so much.
Well, Claire, you think failure to give a content warning if there's something in a course that could be upsetting is actually negligent and unethical?
I think it's a lot more complicated than that. There is no one set definition of what a trigger warning is, right? The research that we have right now dates all the way back from 1985 to 2023. There's no one standard definition of what a trigger warning is. But in order for one to work, whatever form it might take, it takes two things. And that's mutual respect and radical self-responsibility. It's your responsibility to cope with your own trauma. It might not have been your fault that it happened, but it is your responsibility to take care of it.
What does that have to do with someone giving or not giving a trigger warning, whatever you define trigger warning to be?
Isn't the whole point of a trigger warning, right, that the content ahead might activate some trauma?
Well, I don't think there is a point to a trigger warning. That's my point. Because regardless of what you think, the research indicates that trigger warnings, however broadly you define them, are not effective. Look, I'm as sensitive and compassionate to people's reactions as I think you can be. It's what I do. And I don't want to create anyone unnecessary discomfort. What I want to do is prepare people to function better tomorrow than they did today. And if I create an environment where they can avoid learning to cope with what life is going to throw at them, then I am cheating them miserably.
Referencing back to some of the studies that you mentioned, many sources claim that trigger warnings don't work. A more accurate interpretation of that study would more so be that trigger warnings don't hurt.
Well, actually, they do.
Right, and that's because the study that indicates that they do, right? It says it's because of this anticipatory effect that a trigger warning causes. If you're a survivor of abuse, and I tell you, Dr. Phil, this movie might have some abuse scenes, it would be perfectly reasonable for you to have a temporary anxious effect. And that's the harm in the research references.
No, that's a very simplistic view. The point is that if you react to that and therefore avoid the content, then you're not learning to cope with it. Whereas if you continue to interact with it, you learn to be desensitized to it. You may even immerse yourself. In fact, there are evidence-based therapies that indicate that if you go through systematic desensitization, if you go through immersion therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, if you go through any manner of constant exposure to that which creates an autonomic response on your behalf, then that response will diminish and you will no longer be a prisoner to that. And when we have this list of content that gets so broad that literature itself becomes triggering, then that person becomes so siloed in life that they simply can't function because you're not going to get those warnings when you go into the real world.